Hello, everyone. Welcome to Climate Action Brookline's annual town meeting candidate town-wide candidate climate and environmental forum. My name is John Harris. I'm co-chair of Climate Action Brookline and will be the moderator for tonight's event. To be sure that all or as many relevant topics as we have time for are covered, we are working with pre-submitted questions this evening. So I ask, and we have some great questions, by the way. I think everyone will be impressed, and we're going to keep the candidates on their toes. So please, everyone except the candidates, keep yourself muted throughout the meeting. Now, the main competitive townwide race in the May 2nd town election is the select board race, with many significant and controversial issues and 3 candidates for 2 seats. So that is what we will feature this evening. But first, the school committee situation. The 3-year school committee race is not competitive, but the 1-year school committee race is, with 2 candidates for a single seat. So upon the very reasonable request of the 2 candidates, we have, again, our very full agenda, but I've asked, agreed to have that there's enough time for brief statements from the 1-year school committee candidates, beginning with Natalia Linos and then Christopher Mutty. So Natalia, please.
Thank you so much, John. And hello, everyone. My name is Natalia Linas. I'm a town meeting member in Precinct 6, chair of the Advisory Council on Public Health, and running for the 1-year school committee seat. And you might ask, why did we ask to talk about climate? I'm a big proponent that climate action is cross-cutting, and our schools are not only going to be creating the future leaders on climate action, and therefore curriculum matters, but also our schools are buildings that need to think about the operations. So I am committed as part of school committee to put climate action first. It's one of my 3 priorities on my website, votenatalialinos.com, because our buildings, need to be net zero. Our operations, we need to have composting, and our curriculum need to build the leaders of the future. So thank you. Learn more about my priorities on votenatalialinos.com, and I hope to earn your vote.
Natalia, fantastic. All right. And now Christopher Mutty, please. Christopher, you were here moments ago. Okay. All right. This is live TV. Christopher Mutty. Okay. Okay. All right. Going. Chris, you had your chance there. Okay. So now to the select board race, which is the main attraction this evening. By agreement with the 3 candidates, we are going to have opening statements, and then responses to a lot of questions, and then closing statements. And each response, opening, Responses and closing will be 2 minutes long. There is one question that is a little more complicated, will be a little more flexible, I think, with the timing on that one, but I'll let you know which one that is. But please, for all candidates, please try to stick to the timeline because we have an awful lot of questions, as I mentioned. So we will rotate the order of responses among the 3 candidates. For the opening statement, we will begin with incumbent John Van Scoyoc. And John, this is the only time that your prerogative as an incumbent will earn you points. And then we'll go to the candidates in the order of filing. So it'll be after John Van Scoyoc will be Paul Warren and then Arden Reamer. From then on, we will rotate the order of speakers. So I'll tell you what, it's opening statements, and here is a question that came in that I think is probably going to frame your opening statements anyway. So let me read it as well. What do you see as the biggest challenges and opportunities in our climate crisis? And where do you see the select board leading in Brookline's response to the climate crisis? And so first speaker, John Van Scoyoc, please.
John Harris and everyone in attendance, thank you very much. One of the things that happens very quickly, and it happened to me in 2020 when I decided to run for the select board, is that suddenly we are all forced to confront what is our priority number one. And in my case, I came around very quickly to the realization that climate change has to be everyone's priority number one, and that I was going to make it my priority number one as a member of the select board. And I'm very glad I did. I'm also very glad that we got done some things that I think are making a huge difference in Brookline. And the one that I'll mention most prominently, because it involved a little bit of pain, I'll confess, pain to a group that had served the town extremely well. And that is the Select Board's Climate Advisory Committee. But there was a sense that the urgency of the goals of the climate emergency needed to be met with stepped up action. And that led to the formation of the Zero Emissions Advisory Board, so-called ZEAB. It also led to the elevation of ZEAB as not merely a committee advising the select board, but a initiator of proposals that would then go through the select board to town meeting, and then would also partner with our sustainability director, Tom Barrasso, so that we would have a really effective top-down approach. And that's the approach that I want to continue in a second term on the select board, with a dashboard of goals that we track, not just annually and not just monthly, but maybe even weekly, as to progress made, commitments promised, and progress made. I see my 2 minutes is up.
Yes, and everybody, all candidates, be aware you have plenty of opportunity with the questions and then closing statements for anything you don't get to with your opening. So the next opening statement would be from candidate Paul Warren, please.
Hi, thank you, John, and thank you for organizing this event. I'm going to assume that lots of people on this call don't know me, so I'm going to start with the basics and then get into the questions that will get raised. My name is Paul Warren. I've been a 12-year Brookline resident. My wife and I have 2 young children. I'm a stay-at-home dad. Both children are at the Lawrence School, or they will be at the Lawrence School next year. I'm a father of 5. I'm also a grandfather of 2 children that are the same age as my youngest children. I feel that I bring a unique set of perspectives and qualifications to the select board. I have a 30-year extensive business career managing large organizations, planning strategically, managing budgets, and collaborating with other executives to solve complex problems. I'm really good at that. I have a unique start in life. I was a father at 18 years old. I was married at 17. It's unusual. I started out very early, and I've been the benefactor of public Section 8 housing, Medicare, Medicaid, food stamps. So I really understand what it means to be under-resourced and what that means as we start talking about climate. I'm an experienced public servant. I've served on the advisory committee for 2 years. on the zoning subcommittee, as well as the school subcommittee. And I've been a town meeting member for over 4 years, a very active town meeting member, helping to solve some complex problems. And then finally, as I mentioned, I'm a public school dad. I have a great commitment. My wife, Amy, and I have a great commitment to the public schools. And I think it'd be important to bring another individual onto the select board to join Miriam that has a perspective and advocacy for the public schools to integrate. With respect to climate, I'm a planner. I believe that everything that we do planning forward should incorporate and consider climate action. Thank you.
Thank you. So the first detailed question is more of the same, which is Brookline has committed to having net zero emissions by the year 2040.
Wait, John,
Yeah.
what about
Oh,
me?
Arden, I'm sorry. You know, you're
Oh my
absolutely right.
goodness, we've been
Go ahead.
colleagues for years now.
Go for it.
Teasing you.
Yeah. I got all these screens beeping and everything. Sorry about that.
Okay, are you ready for me to begin?
Go ahead, Arden, and I apologize.
No problem. Thank you. Good evening. Thank you, Climate Action Brookline and co-chair John Harris for organizing this environmental forum. I am Arden Reamer, town meeting member in Precinct 8 and colleague of John Harris's, alumni of Mothers Out Front and advocate for progressive environmental policy. Also, I would like to introduce my mom, Sue Reamer, who is joining us as well. She's a senior here in Brookline and lives in Precinct 17. Hi, Mom. In order to avoid taking the time to give you a laundry list of favorable action votes in support of progressive environmental policies in my tenure on town meeting, I ask that you please check my voting record. It speaks for itself. I made a pledge to voters in Precinct 8 when I ran for town meeting that I would advocate for progressive environmental policy, and I have never, ever wavered on that pledge. My voting record speaks for itself, as does my list of endorsers, which can be found on my campaign website, Arden for Brookline. That's the number 4, ardenforbrookline.com. It's a who's of members of Mothers Out Front, Zero Emissions Advisory Board, and Climate Action Brookline. And if I am elected to the select board, I will not only be pursuing progressive environmental policy, but continue on the front lines of implementing it as your leader on the executive board, where I have a long list of things I would like to accomplish that I don't have time to list out right now, but I hope to convince you over the next hour and a half and eventually get to that list in my closing statement. So I just want to let you know that I am exactly the climate warrior and municipal leader you want fighting to save our planet and all of us from the imminent threat of climate disaster we currently face. Thank you.
Fantastic. Everybody's doing a great job staying in time.
Yeah.
The next question, the first respondee will be Paul Warren. Brookline has committed to having net zero emissions by the year 2040. That's a lot to do and time is running out. What role should the select board play in this process in 2 specific areas? What does the town need to plan to do and to implement to zero out emissions for all town-owned facilities and operations? Secondly, what should the town be doing to support and accelerate emissions reduction from non-municipal properties and vehicles in Brookline, including privately owned, state and federally owned, and nonprofit owned in Brookline? So again, net zero emissions by 2040, affecting town and non-town owned buildings and vehicles, starting with Paul Warren, please.
Thank you, John. There's a lot there in the question. I'm going to hopefully I'll keep track of it and you'll keep me honest. So the first is that, the select board as the executive of the town needs to move more towards a forward-looking plan. Most recently, we've been caught up for the past few years in the day-to-day of the town business. And we've ignored important long-term planning. And I believe that long-term planning includes how we're going to convert our core buildings, schools, public facilities, our roadways, and et cetera, to be able to deal with climate change. We're currently dealing with a couple of overrides. It'll be very interesting to see how those go, because that'll be a key indicator as to how much our community is willing to absorb cost-wise. But I think it's incumbent upon the select board to do the important planning. And as I said in my opening statement, we should incorporate every time we make a decision about a park, about a road being reconfigured, about how we're allocating the CIP, what we're doing for planning to renovate a school. We should always center around how do we incorporate our response to climate change. So I think that was your answer to your first question. I forget what was the second part, John?
Well, there were three parts: net zero emissions by 2040, town and non-town owned, and buildings and vehicles.
Right. So the other thing I would say is that, I believe that one of the greatest problems where the majority of our, carbon is being emitted is from residential properties. And that's a multi-billion-dollar expense investment in order to convert those. I believe that we should invest at the select board level to have resources available to help guide and educate homeowners as they're converting from their current systems to new systems. It's very difficult to engage and get information about those types of programs. Mothers Out Front is doing yeoman's work right now, educating the community. They've done a fabulous job. I think the town needs to invest more in educating the community and helping them engage with where the funds are and where the rebates are, et cetera. Thank you.
Thank you. Next respondent, Arden Reamer, please.
Yes, thank you so much. Oh, I'm so glad that you asked that question, because actually when we talk about, let's talk about the town first. I actually met with Erin Galentine today, and we were talking about, she's the Commissioner of Public Works, and we were talking about what needed to happen in the town of Brookline to move it to fossil fuel free to meet our 2040 goal of net zero and our 2030 goal of 50% reduction in emissions. And we were actually talking about the fleet and what she was going to do and what they had started to do to electrify the fleet. And of course, that does start with us right at the very beginning, passing this override for operating expenses, because they want to purchase electric vehicles for their fleet of vehicles, but they also have to have the infrastructure in order to charge them. And that is, and then they have to work with Eversource, which is what they are doing, to electrify and have charging stations at each of the different facilities so that they can charge these electric vehicles as well. And Erin is committed to doing that. And it was great to hear that from her today. Now, in terms of the rest of Brookline, there are several things that need to happen. One, of course, is retrofitting our buildings, and that is an expensive ask. That's a big ask. But the select board just approved something called the PACE program. And let me tell you about the PACE program. So what it does, and one of my goals on the select board would be to implement and publicize it. And that takes commercial, residential, and nonprofit building owners and gives them loans to retrofit their buildings to fossil-free infrastructure. And this is really critical. And the PACE program is wonderful. And as I said, the select board just approved it. And then the other thing, of course, we would be thinking about is zero emissions construction. That's another very important goal that we need to meet in order to meet our net zero goals by 2040. And in terms of electrifying vehicles, we need to have the infrastructure, and that includes charging stations. So we need to have those all around Brookline so that individuals can charge their vehicles. Thank you.
Thank you. And next on this is John Van Scoyac.
And thank you. You're going to notice a difference between the answers given by the other two candidates and my answers, because I'll be referring repeatedly to things we have done. And in the area of things we have done, just about every single one of these initiatives stemmed from that crucial decision that was made shortly after I got elected and led to myself and Heather Hamilton deciding that we needed to step up, move beyond the Climate Advisory Committee, create something called ZAB, elevate ZAB to a role sort of side by side with the select board leadership on climate initiatives. And from that step, we advanced to several other steps, resulting in, to give you an example, earlier this year, and I was given responsibility for working with Representative Tommy Vitola, who I see is here, and boy, does he deserve credit for Brookline's place as one of the leading communities in the state in taking initiatives against climate change. But the example from earlier this year was to get into practice the new specialized stretch energy code, which he and other legislators pulled together, but they needed municipalities to then adopt and to begin to act under the specialized stretch energy code, to actually put it into practice in 2023 rather than waiting till 2024. That might seem like a minor distinction, but guess what? We can't afford to lose 6 months in this effort. I'm sure everyone saw the recent international report that said we are spinning out of control towards that 1.5 degree elevation in global temperatures. Brookline needed to act quickly, and thanks to initiatives taken such as ZAB that came from myself and from Heather and from others on the select board, we're making steps much faster than we had been making before.
Thank you. Okay, now what we will do is begin 3 sections dealing with the 3 top areas parts of our economy that generate greenhouse gases and other environmental problems. And we'll begin with buildings, then we'll go to transportation, and then we'll go to electricity generation. So the first question on buildings, and the first respondent will be Arden Reamer. The question: to meet the town's climate goals, individuals, including homeowners, renters, condo owners, and landlords, will need to make significant changes to decarbonize the buildings they live in. At Brookline Mothers Out Front and Climate Action Brookline, we hear quite often from constituents who want information. For example, I want to switch out my stove. What do I need to know to install heat pumps, etc.? We're trying to meet this need, but have limited resources. Are you hearing these voices as well? How will you try to address residents' desire for support and resources to become more green? And again, the first respondent, Arden Reamer, please.
Well, thank you so much. So this is a very exciting question, especially because as Paul had indicated before, I'm just so impressed with Mothers Out Front and all the work they're doing, and also the Zero Emissions Advisory Board, as John Van Scoyac mentioned, because this is the key to retrofitting our buildings. But as I mentioned before, in the answer to the last question, the PACE program is very important to allow commercial businesses to be able to convert over to electricity. That is key, and go fossil fuel free, because we have many commercial businesses here and we need to do that. In terms of the residential aspect, absolutely. Where do they get the information? They get it from Mothers Out Front. They get it from the town of Brookline. As you mentioned, we have Tom Barrasso, and he is our sustainability director here in the town, and he gives regular updates on our Brookline aggregate, our community aggregate, where we can all buy in. And by the way, I would encourage you all to do this. I've done this myself, where you opt up when you join our aggregate here in Brookline, and then you are buying 100% renewable electricity. And that's exactly what I do. So if you can't put solar panels on your house, which is another thing that we all want to explore to do for our homes in order to electrify, then you can become part of our community aggregate and opt up to 100% green. And these are very simple steps. You can also go through Mass Save, and you can have an energy audit done of your home. This is very important. Before you convert and get rid of your, all your gas in your home, you want to make sure that your home is wrapped up tight. You want to make sure that your windows are preventing air from leaking out. You want to make sure your insulation is efficient and effective. So you want to make sure you get an energy audit from Mass Save first. And if you go to Mothers Out Front website, they will tell you to do that. That is the first step towards electrification. Thank you.
Thank you. The next respondent, John Van Scoyac.
Yeah, at risk of sounding like a broken record, I'm going to talk about ZAB again. Let me tell you about the kinds of things the differences that ZAB has made. So at their most recent meeting, that they discussed first and foremost, how are we going to make sure that we have an implementation plan now that we have adopted this specialized stretch energy code, and we have become one of 10 communities which have been designated to pilot it as a model for other communities to adopt. How can we move forward quickly on this? And members of ZAB were very specific and pointed in their questions of our sustainability director, Tom. What's the plan? How far far are we along in the plan? What's the next step? What about the article we're bringing to town meeting? And that is the role that ZIAB will play on each and every initiative. They are designated to be impatient and to make sure that we don't just make promises, we follow through on commitments. The other thing that ZIAB did at that very same meeting was members began to bring attention to information they had received from electricity customers who were part of that green program that Arden was talking about, who suddenly got switched to a different supplier of electricity and their bills went through the roof. So it turns out, because of the monitoring of ZIAB, we became aware of the problem that exists now there was apparently a transition to a new provider. And in that transition, a lot of people got inadvertently dropped from that green energy program. And now the town is working on figuring out who they are and how we can get them back into that program. But it takes constant effort and monitoring. And thanks to ZIAB, we have it.
Thank you. Now Paul Warren on that same question.
Thank you, John. I want to go back. I think we kind of went off what the question actually was. The question was, how are we helping to convert, residential homeowners and I think businesses to be able to get away from fossil fuels and be able to electrify. I can tell you from my own personal experience that there is a lack of information within the market for homeowners as they are taking on new systems. Perhaps they're purchasing a home, perhaps they're looking to renovate, or they're finding that their system is starting to fail, or maybe they just want to get to electrify. The resources that are available for homeowners to get information about what their options are there's not a significant amount of information out there. As I mentioned earlier, Mothers Out Front is filling that void. I think that that's something that the town should be investing in to help. And I'm also a systems guy. As people apply for building permits, we should be engaging with homeowners to educate them on what their options are. We recently had to redo our house, and we moved from an old oil clunker system that was highly inefficient, and we moved to a high efficient gas system. If we had an opportunity that was 5 years ago to engage with different types of resources, perhaps we might have made a different decision on what we did. So I think it's incumbent upon us to engage and educate with the community. And frankly, I think the select board needs to take a leadership role in this. Many of the articles that have been brought, John keeps referencing ZIAB, the select board did not hold a single public hearing to educate the community about those articles. And I think it's critical. If we're going to have the mass change that we have to have, we need to get the support of the community. And that's not top down, right? That's meeting the community where the change has to happen. And we have to do bottoms up as well. If we can't bring the community along and help them understand the investment that they have to make and the sacrifice, it's not going to happen. And we missed that last time on the select board. Thank you.
Thank you. The next question, first respondent, John Van Scoyoc. This is a question obviously inspired by our grappling with the MBTA Communities Act and by our desire to increase housing density in Brookline while keeping Brookline as the town we know and love. Here's the question. It's been known for decades now that the building style that has the lowest energy usage and the lowest greenhouse gas emissions per capita is, frankly, Manhattan Island. Dense urban high-rise skyscrapers where you can walk or take the subway or the bus for shopping and entertainment. The pros of that, you don't need a car, and the heat from the lower floors migrates up to also heat the floors above. The cons, asphalt and concrete filling up entire blocks. Buildings are too tall to be shaded by mature trees, windows too high to look straight out at trees. The only extensive greenery is in parks like Central Park on their own dedicated blocks. Many people love that way of living, but studies have shown that many more Americans want to live in suburbs. The pros, separated homes, often single family, so no hassle from condo boards, etc., surrounded by greenery on their own lots, woods, and fresh air. Cons, long distances often require a car to commute or to provide necessities. Urban planner Sam Bass-Warner extolled Brookline as a prime example of a streetcar suburb, a living pattern that combines the best of both worlds. Where on that spectrum, Manhattan or streetcar suburb do you see Brookline now? And which direction do you think Brookline should move in? First respondent, John Van Scoyoc.
I want to meet the person who wrote that question. I think they went over their 2-minute time limit. But that is a great question, and it gets right to the heart of things. And I'll try to answer it as succinctly as possible by saying, I'm where Brookline is, and I'm where Brookline is in contemplating where we're going to be next. Brookline is one of those streetcar suburbs. Brookline does have the advantages of a densely populated and densely built North Brookline section. And it does have the green advantages. I'm talking about green trees, lots of open space in terms of there being a more suburban southern part of Brookline. And both have their advantages when it comes to the future of addressing climate change. And both are mentioned in that long preface, so I won't go over them again. We need more trees where there are trees. And I think we're going to need some more density where there is density. The hard part of the question is how much more density, and how do we do it not at the expense of our very, very important and vital commercial heart, and that is Harvard Street. And because the proposals that we're looking at now potentially could raise questions about demolitions. And if there are demolitions, the demolitions could raise questions about whether the rents would go up and threaten the survival of those retail businesses. We need to move very carefully, and we are moving very carefully. But I think that we're going to have a future of some more density where there's density, and hopefully some more trees where there isn't. And both are good for addressing climate change.
Thank you. Next respondent, Paul Warren.
Thank you. So the question is, are we streetcar? Are we suburb? In which direction we should go? And I think was what the question was, John.
Yes.
So the challenge is we are both. We are a streetcar community. That's one of the reasons why Amy and I live where we live. And then we are also a suburb. South Brookline is much different than North Brookline. We absolutely need to increase our density around our transportation systems. We need to do it thoughtfully, and we need to do it in compliance with the MBTA Communities Act. The one thing that I'm absolutely committed to is that this is a once in a generation opportunity to add income restricted housing. I believe the regulations that have been passed down don't allow us to go as high as we want, but as we build, we need to be able to build income restricted housing, because frankly, the people that are low income are often relegated to locations where there aren't trees, right? Where there are heat islands, where they're in flood zones. They're often near, industrial areas. And I think that there's a great opportunity within Brookline as we change our zoning and we become more integrated along Harvard Street or whatever it is that we decide to do, that we have an opportunity to invite individuals that can't come to Brookline today into our community. And I think that's really important. With respect to trees and such, I'm seeing lots clear cutted as properties are purchased. We are losing our urban forest. It's quite remarkable. I appreciate Jocelyn Murphy brought an article to be able to help at least protect some of the trees or make us get compensated for the loss of those trees. But if we're going to fight climate change, we need trees, we need grass, we need areas to be able to absorb, take away the heat, reflect it back, as opposed to having it just be cement and concrete. So I appreciate that we're a streetcar. I also appreciate our green spaces out in South Brookline. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Next, Arden Reamer, Manhattan Island or a streetcar suburb?
Well, I think this is the best thing about Brookline is that we can have our cake and eat it too. We are the best of both worlds, and we can bring that to our climate resiliency. we can bring that to our climate plan. So let's start with the urban areas where we are currently, where I currently live in Coolidge Corner along Harvard Street. And let's talk about transportation accessibility. That is a key place to build more dense housing because people can commute. If they are commuting, they live where they shop, they can commute on public transportation. So that is critical. And then the other thing, if we're talking about building affordable housing and we're talking about building it in transportation accessible areas, we can look at the federal standards for something called passive house for all affordable housing today. So as a matter of fact, our affordable housing today handed down to us from the federal government has a standard called passive house, which is zero emissions. So that is exactly a type of housing that we want to be building and we want to emulate here in Brookline as we think about building more densely along our transportation accessible corridors. And what we want to make sure that if we're building, we use our zero emissions, our net zero building standards when we do that. Now, let's talk about South Brookline. Let's talk about our tree canopy. So we have, when I was meeting with Erin today, Erin Galentine, we talked about our urban forest climate resiliency master plan. That is a key part of the planning that we do here in Brookline when it comes to our trees. We want to plan out how many trees we have in Brookline. We think about how many trees we're planting, how many trees are dying or cut down. And we want to make sure that we are always on top of that and planning for that because we do not want to lose our urban forest. We here in Brookline value our trees more than anything. I mean, not more than anything, but we value them very highly. So I hope I explained to you how we can have our cake and eat it too in Brookline. Thank you.
Thank you. Still within buildings, the first respondent on the next question, Paul Warren. And this is a question, it's complicated and I've combined questions from two different people. So in terms of timing now, don't worry quite so much about shoot for 3 minutes. And Susan, timekeeper, if you could, when the clock, do the 2 minutes and then run it a second time and we'll trust our speakers to go about 1 more minute. Let's see how that goes. Regarding the Pierce School, get ready. The Pierce School's design team's own energy analysis shows that the large carbon footprint caused by demolition of the current Pierce School building will never be compensated for by its replacement, and that the least carbon footprint is created by option 1, which requires the least demolition. What is your position on demolition of the Pierce School building? That is part 1. Here's part 2. Geothermal at the Pierce School's town hall, the campus of Pierce School, Town Hall, and the main library. Considering the large construction cost of rebuilding the Pierce School and the prospect of state funding in this climate policy aware juncture, including for geothermal, how can the select board push for geothermal in a productive way? And there's a comment here, geothermal is particularly efficient when it's networked and matched by opposite loads, such as matching a winter heat load with refrigeration, or balances time of use, schools during the day, homes at night, et cetera, et cetera. How can the select board push for networked geothermal at the Town Hall, Pierce School, Library campus? And again, so 2 parts. At the Pierce School, first, embodied carbon, and second, campus-wide linked geothermal. First speaker, Paul Warren, please.
Okay, so there's 2 parts, there's not 3 parts. So the first
There's 2
about,
parts.
yeah, is demoing the school. So, you know, and this is known, I support the Pierce School debt exclusion fully for a whole host of reasons. But, you know, this question of carbon, the impact of tearing the building down, and we can never, you know, do enough to resolve the carbon impact of that. I'm a product of the open school system. Okay. It's almost impossible to undo the damage that education format did to me in 7th, 8th, and 9th grade. I almost failed high school. It set me back learning wise. It created a whole bunch of social issues for me. Frankly, it might have contributed to me, getting married at 17 years old. There was a whole bunch of issues. That school is inadequate. It's an inequitable education environment for the children that attend that school. So I'm willing to take the cost of the carbon in order to be able to have an equitable education for the children of the Pierce School District of Brookline. That's my answer to that. With respect to network geothermal, it's a little bit above my pay grade, John, frankly. But I believe that we should be using geothermal when it's possible and financially feasible. If networking it helps to build the business case and be able to spread out that investment and the return across multiple buildings, I certainly would support that. Frankly, where I live, I would love to do a network geothermal with my neighbors and the several buildings around me. So I don't think we should just talk about municipal buildings. Can we actually address this issue in neighborhoods where we can actually have different homes come together and use network geothermal? It will have a major impact on our zoning. We have to think about zoning. We have to think about regulations, setbacks, and all that stuff. But I think there's a tremendous opportunity for geothermal and network geothermal. And frankly, when I do my house, I will do geothermal. Thank you.
Thank you. Arden Reamer.
Oh,
Pierce
yes.
School.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. I would like to quote our state rep, Tommy Vitolo, who is a climate warrior for all of us, but also a supporter of the Pierce School debt exclusion and renovation project. And this is what he says: rebuilding Pierce now is by far and away the least cost action to provide a safe, equitable, and appropriate educational facility to the children of Brookline Village. Every other approach is justice delayed, justice denied. And I think we can never forget about climate justice. And we need to think about our children when we're talking about that. So whether or not it ends up using more emissions, demolitioning it, we're thinking about one, climate justice when it comes to our children, and equitable education. So we need to think about that, but we're also thinking about the building that we're going to build. And let's remember that we are, if we get together as a town meeting and pass warrant article 15 this spring, then we are making the decision as a town that we are going to participate in this pilot program, and all renovations, 50% or more, are going to have to be fossil fuel free. And that includes our building of the Pierce School. So in that case, we want to go ahead and vote for warrant article 15, pass that at spring town meeting, and then rebuild the Pierce School so that we have a brand new fossil fuel free climate justice school for our children here in Brookline. And then we also have educational equity as well. Now, I want to talk about geothermal. Thank you very much for the second part of that question. We as a town meeting, I think a year or 2 years ago, passed geothermal for the Driscoll School. It was absolutely the right thing to do, even though it was the more expensive option. And we are going to implement geothermal as well in our Pierce School. It is the right way to go. It is the smart way to go. It is the more cost-effective way to go. And it is also fossil fuel free. So I absolutely support that and the infrastructure to go along with it. And I think if anyone questions the nature of this renovation, this and the Pierce School, that they should talk to our rep Tommy Vitolo about what it means with justice delayed, justice denied, and that we should go ahead and support this project so that we end up with a fossil fuel free, beautiful, ADA compliant Pierce School. Thank you.
Thank you. John Van Scoyoc, embodied carbon and geothermal at the Pierce School, please.
Thank you, John. And I am proudly the only one of the three candidates you're listening to tonight who not only agrees that the demolition is one of the many reasons that I personally am going to vote no on the ballot question for the borrowing for the Pierce project. But I pushed the select board to actually add the geothermal. Well, why would I make a project more expensive if I'm planning to vote against it? because it isn't going to be for me to decide. It's going to be for the voters to decide. The voters might not agree with me. They might decide to build the school. If they do decide to build the school, I want it to have geothermal. And on the select board, I'll give myself a little bit of credit. I think I was the most consistent voice insisting that we should add that to the project, and actually pushing the school committee to agree to add that to the project. And I thank Tommy for being one of those who also insisted we add that to the project. But getting back to demolitions, they absolutely do have a net impact that can be negate for many years. I don't know if I agree with that assessment that said forever, but can negate for many years the benefits of the greater energy efficiency of a new building. And that needs to be recognized. And it so needs to be recognized that there's an entire school of approach to building projects of the future that says the greenest building is the building you have. Look at the building you have and consider the demolition impacts in terms of the negatives on the environment. All of that carbon that went into the building of that building, all of it wasted, all of it about to be burned again to build the next building. So the greenest building is the building you have is a recognized a point of view that you would think would have been incorporated into the planning of the Pierce School project, but it wasn't. The only alternative that was offered to the demolition and the rebuilding was a gut renovation, which of course would prove extremely costly. Let me tell you about part of this demolition that is being planned as part of the $212 million project. Part of the demolition that is driving up that project cost by many, many millions of dollars is the demolition of a parking garage for dozens and dozens of cars. Who would have thought in the era when we finally recognize and come to terms with the damage that the automobile has done to our environment, that we would be spending millions of dollars to demolish and rebuild a garage that doesn't need demolishing and rebuilding to accommodate dozens and dozens of cars. But the planning for the Pierce project was so beset with the limits of the site that they actually had to make that decision to invest millions of our taxpayer dollars in the demolition and rebuilding of the garage part of the complex. So there's just too many downsides, I think, to the Pierce project for us to be investing that kind of money in it. And there was too little attention paid to the potential for adaptive reuse. Adaptive reuse is why we have the St. Mark's Church condo complex that everyone loves, the St. Aidan's Church condos that everyone loves, the teen center that everyone loves, all adaptive use projects. I think the Pierce has a great future as an adaptive use project, but we got to look at it that way and not sort of put blinders on as to how we're going to look at the future of that project.
Thank you. The next question, first respondent, Arden Reamer, and it has to do with the ZAB warrant articles of the fall 2022 town meeting. The Zero Emissions Advisory Board filed several warrant articles. Not all of them passed. And actually, this is two different questions from two different people. One of them came in very last minute, so not quite integrated, but two aspects. Given the fact that not all of the ZAB warrant articles passed, what is your plan for how we will reach our climate mandates and pay for the changes that need to be made to our buildings and transportation, knowing that the state and federal governments have not given sufficient funding? Second person, why was town meeting unable to pass the ZAB warrant articles that would have funded aid to homeowners who wanted to convert their gas and oil heat to fossil fuel-free alternatives like heat pumps? How can the select board help us recover fossil fuel-free financing for Brookline homeowners? And again, first respondent, Arden Reamer, please.
Oh, yes. Thank you so much. Thank you for that question, because actually I voted in support of all of the ZAB warrant articles, and I just wanted to be clear about that. So I Sorry, my daughter is making dinner in the background, so perhaps you can hear her. But anyway, I spoke earlier about the PACE program that was just passed by the select board, and that will help commercial nonprofit businesses to convert to fossil fuel free and get rid of all of their gas. But in terms of the rest of the town, we have to have a plan. And this plan is critical for us to get to net zero by 2040 with a 50% reduction in 2030. So those 6 warrant articles that came before town meeting last year were a package to get us moving in that direction. It's too bad that 2 of them failed, because eventually they will have to come back to town meeting again if we want to reach our climate goals here in Brookline. And let's talk about these climate goals and how we get there here in our town. We need to look at our energy and utilities. We need to decommission our gas by 2040 if we're going to reach a net zero goal by then. We need to reduce the cost of electricity, right, to all of our consumers. And a part of that is community choice aggregation, which hopefully we all buy into, which reduces the price, even if we have 100% renewable electricity and opt up for that. We need to consume 100% carbon-free electricity. That's very important too. Another point for our community choice aggregation. We need to make sure we have 100% charging vehicle infrastructure. We're moving in that direction. We're installing many new charging stations this coming year around Brookline, and that's very important, but we have to look at private people and their parking as well. We need to retrofit our buildings. That's by far the most expensive. The PACE program helps with commercial, but we need help with our private, with our individuals and residential costs as well. And we want to use zero emissions construction. And I didn't even get through my whole list, John. But anyway, I got partway there. So
Okay,
but
and
we have
Arden,
to get if we're going to get to zero emissions, we have to get 100% there.
Arden, don't forget you've got closing statements to wrap up, to sweep up everything you hadn't gotten.
Yeah,
Next
I know.
respondent
Thanks.
is on the ZEAB articles. John Van Scoyoc, please.
Thanks very much, John. And like Arden, I also voted for all of the ZEAB articles. I also, just one more time, I just want to say, the reason we had the ZEAB articles is because we had ZEAB. And the reason we had ZEAB is because my initiative picked up on by others on the select board, or maybe others want to say it was their initiative picked up on by me, but somehow among us on the select board, there were 2 in particular who really wanted to see ZEAB happen. And I want to say something about Jesse Gray, who was the initiator of the articles that John, you're questioning us about, and that Arden and I voted for down the line at town meeting, and 2 of them didn't pass. Part of getting things done in a way that recognizes the urgency of the climate crisis is recognizing when you have someone in your midst who has the qualities, the insight, and the knowledge and the energy to take command of these issues and to force Brookline to be on the cutting edge of these issues. And that person was Jesse Gray. And so part of getting ZEAB together was recognizing we needed some agency that was worthy of Jesse Gray as chair. Now I know that he can be a controversial, and unfortunately he's on his way to another part of the country. So we're not going to have him next year or in the remainder of this year, as far as I can tell. But Jesse, for the time that he was here, was just the right person at the right time in the right place. But it took recognition of that and championing that for us to have ZEAB, and for ZEAB to have energetic leadership, and for that energetic leadership to lead to the introduction of these articles to town meeting. And I'm really glad I was part of that. I hope I have the opportunity to be part of Act 2 for ZEAB in the next term.
Thank you. Next respondent, Paul Warren, please.
All right, thank you, John. So I voted against all of the ZEAB articles, and there's a very simple reason. You'll quickly learn about me, and I'm very consistent. I have a strong value of public engagement and bringing the public along. The select board and many boards and commissions in Brookline have drifted away from communicating with the public. And it's actually been shocking to me. The ZAB articles is a perfect example. I don't blame ZAB for this. I actually hold the select board accountable. They did not hold a single public hearing. They punted on these articles. They did not hold a public hearing. The public was not alerted to them other than, the warrant, which is published. The public really doesn't read the warrant. Our other boards and commissions did not take these articles up. And I think we did a tremendous disservice to the community. I called David Gladstone after the first session of town meeting. We took these articles. And I said, David, are you aware that, and he's the chair of our commercial areas. And I said, are you aware that these articles are coming forward that will tax businesses up to 25% for their gas, up to 3% on their real estate? And he said, I haven't heard a word. This is the guy who communicates with all our businesses in town. So look, I have a tremendous amount of respect for the brain trust of Jesse and ZAB and the work that they're focusing on. I support the work, but I value above all else bringing the public along. And if we are going to increase the costs to residents tax-wise, their real estate taxes, their gas taxes, and their excise taxes, we should ask them and we should inform them. And that was a significant miss on the select board part and not doing that. And that's why I voted against all of them. Thank you.
Thank you. We are now moving to the transportation category, which is number 2 of the trifecta of major greenhouse gases in Massachusetts and in Brookline. There will be 2 questions here. The first deals with EV charging, the second with micromobility. The EV charging question, the first respondent will be John Van Scoyoc. Gas stations began to proliferate wildly in the U.S. following the 1911 breakup of the Standard Oil monopoly, which boosted competition. It was a case of a huge supply waiting to stimulate demand. EV charging is a very different situation. There is already significant demand for current uses of electricity, and electric utilities face astronomical fines if they fail to meet that demand, even for a very short period of time. Our quest to wean buildings completely off of fossil fuels means a huge increase in demand for electricity simply to run buildings, heat and cool buildings. If you add to this the demand for EV charging, the market clearly is not meeting this pent-up demand. Is there a role for town government, especially for the select board, in increasing the availability of EV charging stations in Brookline? And if so, what should that role be? First respondent, John Van Scoyoc, please.
John Harris, I have to thank you for my what knowledge I have on the question of how the grid can be brought into sync with the demand that we all want to increase at the local level and the state level. My limited knowledge on that is due to you and due to this group, which sponsored one of the more fascinating and contentious discussions of this very topic, which, because you hosted that discussion and because I listened in on it, you and I are both well aware that this is a question that's going to be settled at the federal and the state level. It involves federal regulation. It involves the role of the states as to how we can make the grid move to the level that we need it to be at to meet the demand that we're insisting will result from our climate goals. So I'm not going to pretend that that can be addressed at the local level by Brookline. I will tell you what can be done, in Brookline, and that's what we're doing, which is, again, getting back to the specialized stretch energy code, direct connection there to the ZAB initiative, to Tommy Vitola's role, to working with Tommy. I was the designated select board member to work with him to get the special town meeting held in January so that we could get out front of the specialized stretch energy code. So that's something that's going to increase electricity demand, and it should. The whole subject matter of charging stations, I think, comes down to Brookline can be part of incentivizing there being more charging stations by requiring that every time we purchase a new vehicle, with rare exceptions, that it be an electric vehicle. And that's something that I, again, have advocated. And I would love to see ZIAB take the initiative on that, as they already are, actually, in this current year. But I really want to see numbers go up. I know my time is up. I'm just going to mention, I had an opportunity to quickly ask our town administrator, Chaz Carey, the other day, how are we doing on the vehicle purchasing of electric vehicles? And in a very excited way, I hope I quote the number correctly. He said, we're up to 16, and that's actually progress. That is progress. But as I said to him, let's make everyone that we do from now on. And he's working on it. He's working on it.
So John, a little wrist slap there for going significantly over time. And
I'm
please,
sorry.
candidates, don't make this a habit. Final respondent on the EV charging question in Brookline, Paul Warren, please.
Not final. Hold on.
not
I haven't
final.
responded.
Oh, really?
Poor
See, I
Arden,
get-
we keep
everything
forgetting
gets
Arden.
mixed up with my cards and everything. Okay.
But I'm not going to let them forget you.
I won't
Um,
take it personally, John Harris.
Arden,
I've got
do you
things
wanna- do you
beeping. I've
wanna
got
go
cards.
first?
I've got everything happening.
No, go ahead.
Arden, would
Go
you
ahead.
like to go first?
Go ahead,
Since
Paul.
You always
I'm
go. Okay. So the question is about EV. Look, we should expand EV charging stations in all our municipal lots. If you go to a lot, there's maybe 2 or 3. Given the pace of EV electric vehicle adoption, all of our municipal lots should be increased significantly. And again, I think this is a function of money. And how can we do that in a way with the existing CIP? Maybe there's some partnerships that we can do as well. I'd also like to see us do much more solar. We should have solar arrays above our parking lots to be able to help mitigate the cost of charging. We have lots of space in Brookline to be able to generate electricity through through solar arrays. With respect to micromobility, John, I know micromobility is a passion of yours, which I support. If we want to increase the use of micromobility, we need to make it safe to drive micromobility vehicles in Brookline. Today, it's not.
Oh, just so you don't use your time, micromobility is the very next question. So
Oh,
this
it's the next-
question
oh.
is EV charging if you have more.
It's
you
only,
have
okay,
more
I thought
on
it was,
EV
I thought it was a 2-part question, John. I'm sorry. So I fully support
Yep.
expanding our EV charging networks, and frankly, requiring that new construction have EV charging, within the units. Thank you.
Oh,
Okay.
Okay.
I
Arden,
love,
please. Yeah.
thank you. I love this question, and I'll tell you why. In 2016, my husband and I dumped the pump, and I was thrilled to do it. I have not been to a pump other than maybe with a rental car in 7 years. It's amazing. So my husband actually, not to sound like an infomercial, is a mechanic for Tesla. And he drives a Tesla and has for many, many years. And we road trip everywhere in it. There is absolutely the infrastructure for it. But I drive a Chevrolet Bolt. It requires a charge point. And what did I see in our plan for our adding our charging stations here in Brookline, which is absolutely a part of us electrifying our vehicles and becoming net zero by 2040, is charge points being installed in the public lots all throughout Brookline. So there we go. We're creating the infrastructure, and it's very important, but it is a mix of both private companies that sell the vehicles that are affordable, because believe me, my Chevrolet Bolt is more affordable than my husband's Tesla Model 3, absolutely, but also that we have the infrastructure to go ahead and support that, and that is key. Now, I've also seen something else that's pretty amazing. I go over to Newton South High School once a week and walk Oreo there while my daughter's in an appointment, and what do they have over all their parking lots at Newton South High School? Solar panels. Isn't that brilliant? To install solar panels over their parking lots at Newton South High School, generating electricity that can be used to support some of their incredible goals for net zero and some of their transportation, like Numo. They have some transportation initiatives over there that we should be thinking of for our seniors and for our our community here in Brookline, and they support it with solar panels over their parking lots. I think this is a brilliant idea, and I think a direction that we want to move in, and a way to improve and increase our infrastructure so that we can move towards 100% electric vehicles. Thank you.
Thank you. Transportation part 2, micromobility, and the first respondent will be Paul Warren. How do you balance the need for safe routes or lanes for bicycles and micromobility devices with 1, the increased risk of accidents for cars and trucks in skinnier lanes, and 2, with the needs of less able and elderly residents who need car parking spaces in front of commercial buildings and residences? And part of that part 2, with the loss of on-street car parking spaces and allowing micromobility devices on sidewalks, cause Brookline to lose its age-friendly city designation. So first respondent, Paul Warren, please.
Thank you, John. I'm going to start with your last part first, your last component of your question. I do not support micromobility devices on sidewalks. I live in a neighborhood where there are 3 individuals that are blind. We have folks that are significantly disabled, physically disabled in wheelchair, and some folks that are very elderly, aging in place. And to have someone come up behind you on an electric vehicle, some of these things fly. That the big wheel, one wheel thing, those go very fast, and it is very, very intimidating for pedestrians, and specifically those that are aging and those with disabilities. So I think it's really important for us to be able to segment the public way. I know this comes at a cost. It's going to come at a cost of automobile space. And frankly, you asked about, if we take some of the space for automobiles, we start having some parking, we have a dedicated lane for micromobility. Frankly, I think the autos would slow down, which I support. My children do not ride their bikes on streets in Brookline. There's a very simple reason why. It's not safe. In my view, it's not safe. I was sent to the hospital 9 years ago. I had a hospital stay because I got run over by a vehicle in a road on my bicycle. And it wasn't the driver's fault. It wasn't my fault. It was the configuration of the roadway. It didn't allow for any error. And she made an error, maybe I made an error, and it caused a lot of pain for me. I got scraped off the ground and brought to the hospital. So I fully support us segmenting the road in a thoughtful way, the public way, so that we can have safe pedestrian passage. We have an area for micromobility and bicycling, and we have a place for automobiles. And frankly, I think there's plenty of room to go to have space where we can also park. Thank you.
Thank you. Arden Reamer, micromobility.
Oh, exciting. Okay. So let me start with the fact that last week I had the pleasure of attending the Shared Mobility Advisory Committee. I was very impressed with them, and they are working hard right now on making recommendations to the Transportation Board on those exactly what you're talking about, rule for how we use micromobility in our town. Because we did have a pilot scooter program several years ago, and I think it was a success in some ways, but it was also very upsetting to many people like seniors and those who were scared about when the scooters were on the sidewalk. So we need to have a clear set of rules around how micromobility is used in our town. And thankfully, we have the Shared Advisory the Mobility Advisory Committee coming up with those and making their recommendation to the Transportation Board. So we are sure to have those rules in place should we begin to see more scooters around town as we did back when we were in that pilot program a few years ago. I think that was a key component that was missing back with that program with the scooters. And next up, when we talk about bicycle safety, and we talk about safety here in Brookline, we need to talk about those new bollards. And I think those are incredible. And I just want to give a big shout out to our Bicycle Advisory Committee, to Biking Brookline, and to our Transportation Board and our Department of Public Works, because those bollards, I don't know if anyone has noticed them, but they've come up along Harvard Street in front of Starbucks, and they are phenomenal. because people always pull up and park in front of Starbucks illegally and run in and get their latte or whatever. And that is a danger to pedestrians, and it's a danger mostly to cyclists. And those bollards are terrific. They're also put them in along Beacon Street, just past Coolidge Corner on the way to Washington Square. I was driving there yesterday and saw how cyclists could go right along, beautiful sunny day, right along with the bollards protecting them from the traffic. Those are brilliant. Yay, bravo, Brookline, for installing those. May we get many more out on the streets. Thank you.
Thank you. Micromobility, John Van Scoyoc.
Just a quick comment on bollards. As the incumbent select board member in this contest, I love hearing about all of the good things that are happening right now, including bollards. And those things happen because of talented people at the head of the DPW, and because of talented people in the transportation department, and because of a really solid transportation board. Maybe that has a little bit to do with who's on the select board these days. I hope so. And I'll put in a plug for Vision Zero while I'm at it. But as to micromobility, I was sort of a maverick on the select board in saying I didn't think Brookline needed those scooters. That the problem with those scooters was that was profit driven by companies that just dumped them on the sidewalks. There was no control over their use of our sidewalks to both dump their vehicles, to try to make some money off of their vehicles, and also the use of those vehicles by the public. That gave that kind of micro-mobility a bad name. But I think the micro-mobility that might have a future is the kind practiced by our host, John Harris. And I will cite the example of a recent meeting of the Council on Aging, which I'm proud to be the select board liaison to. And John will attest that he walked into kind of a lion's den there, because many of the people at the Council on Aging meeting were very upset about the prospect that there were going to be micro mobility devices on the sidewalk. So along comes John, himself a self-confessed senior citizen who identifies with them in terms of their demographic, brought his micro mobility device, which was a sit-down scooter. And he and people like Hugh Madison are going to change thinking about micro mobility devices, and might even satisfy the safety concerns of a lot of our senior citizens. But keep working at it, John. It's a good cause.
John, thank you for buttering me up, but no favors in this meeting here tonight for that. Okay, so we're moving on to the third in the top three in terms of climate impacts, which is in Brookline and in probably the world generally, which is electricity generation. Okay, and the first respondent on this question will be Arden Reamer. The Brookline Green Electricity Program allows residents who cannot put solar panels on their own roofs access to clean electricity, and it is a great program. But the constantly decreasing cost of solar panels makes it increasingly cost effective to place solar panels in what were marginal locations. Shouldn't Brookline begin a massive plan to encourage homeowners to install solar panels on their roofs? And a wrinkle on this, what about the issue of solar panels on the roofs of homes in Brookline's historic district? So Arden Reamer, please.
Well, I just spoke about this, what I witnessed at Newton South High School and what I've seen in Newton. And that is where our municipality can take on a lion's share of this, so that the folks who are in historic districts, or the folks who have big trees over their homes, which is definitely a norm here in Brookline, because of course we support our urban canopy and understand how crucial that is. We can start to install them in Brookline in municipal areas. And I love how I remember a couple of years ago when I was out walking and I looked up, and there they were installing photovoltaics on the Florida Ruffin Ridley School. I was like, bravo. I think that was a Zoe Lynn initiative from back in the day. We have them on the Denny building. I mean, we have gotten them up on our buildings here in Brookline so that where we have heat sources from, say, geothermal or other ways, but the solar panels are key. And there's a way that as a municipality, we can take on a brunt of that and share it with our residential customers. But as I said, I'm a huge proponent of our community aggregation. I opt up, I get 100% renewable. It is so important that I do that. Like, that is the first thing I do no matter what. It is a critical program because, like a co-op, the more people who buy into it, the price goes down. And that's what we want, is affordability. We don't want to lose our affordability. We want people to be proactive and push for net zero and work towards our goal, but we don't want to make them too uncomfortable. And we, of course, don't want to in any way burden the cost for them beyond what they can absorb. So that's the way the municipality factors in things like community choice aggregation, in solar panels, in geothermal, and in helping us move towards our net zero goal by 2040 with 50% reductions by 2030. Thank you.
Thank you. John Van Scoyoc, the issue of installing, really encouraging the installation of solar panels throughout Brookline.
Thank you. And I will confess, one of the things I like about my involvement in addressing the climate change goals and making that my top priority is that it's complicated. I like complicated issues, and this one is complicated. So let me explain why. Solar panels on roofs are just one way of doing solar panels. The major alternative to that it would be, distributed sort of solar panel farms or large installations, such as over, like as Arden mentioned, a canopy over a parking area. Brookline right now through ZAB, as a result of a meeting at which some questions were raised by, among others, me, has called for a pause and an evaluation of which way to go forward on solar panels on roofs, especially school roofs. This question came up because of a project that is intended for the Heath School. And the alternatives are to do it through a lease type arrangement with a provider, or to own the panels. And it's important to do a thorough evaluation of which of those options pays off in the long run, because solar panels are an investment for the long run. And if we don't get it right, we're stuck with the bad decision for 20, 30, for as many years as that solar panel installation is on the roof. So I'm glad that on a complicated question, we didn't just rush to say, oh, it's a solar panel, it must be good. Let's do the first thing that comes our way. We said, what are the alternatives? Let's study them and let's do it right. And as far as homeowners go, I think we should do the maximum getting out of the way for homeowners who want to put them on their roof. But until we figure out what's the best way to do them, I don't think we're ready to start promoting one way or another for homeowners to do them.
Thank you. Solar panels in Brookline. Paul Warren, please.
Thank you, John. I have to apologize. My dog has decided to start barking. So that's what you're hearing, Maggie. As you can see, the sun is hitting me in the face now. It's reflecting off my neighbor's window. There's a tremendous amount of energy available to us. We just need to capture it. So John is right, and I respect John's comments on this and appreciate them. This really is a financial type of discussion about whether you own them, whether you lease them, whether you're using farms somewhere else. And I do think we need to be thoughtful about how we make our investments, but we should be utilizing our rooftops as much as possible. I do want to mention that capturing the energy from the sun is only the first part of it. You either have to use it right away or you have to store it. And so, batteries are really an important component to the solar panel equation. And, one of the things that battery banks do, and I've had lengthy conversations with our fire department about this, they do catch on fire. And there's some significant complexities to storing energy and batteries that we need to think about. How does that impact our zoning? How does it impact our building code? How does it impact our capabilities to fight fires? Because it is a different, it's much different to fight a battery fire. With respect to historic homes, I live in a historic home. I'm in a historic district. I know how difficult it is to get anything done. And one of the things that I would expect that we will do, and I think we're starting to do this, is we need to take a hard look at our historic preservation regulations and guidelines and start allowing for historic homes to become more energy efficient through windows, through insulation, through the type of roofing, and also, yes, putting solar panels on top of roofs, and specifically maybe some new types of solar panels that look like slates or traditional rooftops, but would be typically not adopted by the Preservation Commission. I'm sorry I went over, John. Thank you.
Thank you. So again, I'm mixing myself up. Have we covered solar panels, all three panelists? We've all covered it. Okay, we're now we're moving to kind of a general round. There are just 3 questions remaining. Almost think of this as a lightning round if you can, and please do not exceed the 2-minute time limit so we can wrap up close to on time. Then the first question, John Van Scoyac. What do you think is the best way for the town to protect green space and trees for climate resiliency and health and well-being of citizens while pursuing greater housing density? John Van Scoyac, please.
Well, for starters, let's not give any of it up. So, we're blessed with a fair amount of green space, but maybe not quite enough. I was an initiator. I'm going to take that back. I was among many people who strongly favored and worked for the passage of the Community Preservation Act in Brookline. And that's going to be extremely important. Because the middle, one of the objectives of that is to protect our open spaces. We also, I think, when it comes to tree canopy, we did do a terrific report on that. The report found that we need to do far more replacement of trees, that canopy trees, than we are currently doing. We haven't yet met that goal. We need to meet that goal. That's only one part of the effort. We need to address what is ongoing now when there are demolitions, and a lot of people are talking about demolitions these days. That one of the consequences is it isn't just buildings that come down, it's the trees on the adjacent properties that come down. Sometimes even on not the property itself where the demolition is happening, but on the next property over. Trees are coming down. And so we need to strengthen our tree protection bylaw. That's a combination of incentives but also penalties. I'll say one word of congratulations for what I think is a terrific program, which is that if you have a street facing property and you want to put a tree in your front yard, the town will provide the tree at no cost to you. And I didn't know that program existed until just about 6 months ago. So I can't take any credit for that program, but that's a great program.
Thank you, John. The issue of trees and climate resiliency, Paul Warren, please.
Thank you, John. So I'm agreeing with John Van Scoyac. We need to protect every tree that we have. I've seen too many times now where a property has been sold and a developer comes in and they clear cut trees that are 100 years old. It's shocking to me that this is happening. I don't see that there's any type of enforcement. I thought we had a tree bylaw at a certain size, you couldn't cut it down. So whatever is taking place, we either need to increase our enforcement of it, or we need to, get some prevention in place, because we are losing a significant part of our tree canopy. I'm looking out my window and I can see where there used to be 4 big trees, they're gone now. With respect to how we deal with this going forward, with respect to density, I was a co-sponsor of the warrant article that called for an update to our comprehensive plan. I was also a sponsor of the budget amendment to fund that plan when the select board refused to fund it. So, we need to have a long-term comprehensive plan update. Doesn't stop development, but it is a plan to say, how are we going to grow? Where are we going to grow? How does green space get incorporated into that? How do we protect it? How do we modify and expand our roadways and other areas in order to support density? As density grows, the pressure on our green space is going to increase. And that's going to require more funding to maintain that green space. It's going to require more funding to ensure that trees that maybe are getting a lot of pressure are maintained more often. And we're going to need to plant more trees and grass and other areas to be able to deal with the heat. So I think it's very, very important that we protect what we have and have a plan for how we're going to grow in the future and support our green spaces. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Trees and Arden Reamer, trees and open space, please.
Well, I can't believe that no one has taken the opportunity to thank you, John Harris and Jocelyn Murphy, and all of those who were co-petitioners of our warrant article 10 last year, which helped support and created a bylaw for tree preservation here in Brookline on residential properties. And I just want to commend you. I voted in favor of it. I want to commend you for that warrant article. I know that a lot of our constituents here in Precinct 8, Rebecca Arnaldi, who's on our Zoom tonight, were in favor and supportive and understand the critical nature of your warrant article 10 for tree preservation here in Brookline. And that is only the beginning, right, John? So anyway, thank you very much for that. Then I also want to talk about, of course, our urban forest climate resiliency master plan. Just like any other resiliency, or just like any other plan we need to have in place in our community, we absolutely need to have a plan in place for our trees. We need to make sure that we are planting trees. We are continuing to plant them and create our urban forest. And we need to think about how many we're losing, and make sure that we are planting enough that we are compensating for that, if not creating more of an urban canopy here in Brookline. And because we do have more of a suburban feel to part of Brookline as well as our urban feel. And you can really see the difference on an aerial view. If you look at Boston and Brighton and Allston, even from North Brookline, how many trees that we have here. So that is a key part of it. So I want to thank you for your part, John Harris, and for town meeting's part in passing that bylaw, because trees are so important to us here in Brookline, and we need to plan for them just like we do everything else in our town. Thank you.
Thank you. I think everybody, all three candidates have buttered me up in one way or another. And as to reward you, I'm now going to be more of a tough guy, which is we've got 2 questions to go. I'm going to ask these 2 questions be 1-minute lightning rounds. It'll be the same time clock because 2 minutes is all we've got on it, but try to do it in 1 minute if you can. Okay. And the first,
and then will we have time for closing statements
then
at
2
the end,
minutes
John
each
Harris?
for closing statements. Yes.
Thank you.
And the first 1 minute, first lightning round, 1 minute, Paul Warren. The question is, the warmer winters due to the climate crisis may lead to more rodents in town because we will no longer, won't have so much of the very cold weather that actually kills or slows down the rodents or whatever. Are you satisfied with the town's current plans to deal with the potential exacerbation in the spring, probably happening now, of our rodent control problem? And the first 1 minute respondee, Paul Warren, please.
So to answer the question, am I satisfied? I'm satisfied that we have an idea of how to do it. It's in, I believe, the operating override that hopefully will be approved by the voters. But I spoke at length with Erin Galentine about this. There's been a significant change in our human behavior in Brookline because of COVID. And people have migrated into the parks, and they're eating in the parks, and they're spending time with families in the parks, and the trash is generated in the parks. And so the rodents have gone to the parks. So we need to adjust how we actually deal with rats and rodents. And part of that is being able to purchase the equipment and hiring the resources to be able to do more trash pickups, which we currently can't do because we don't have the money to do it. So am I satisfied with it? We could always do more, but I have a great confidence in our DPW and Erin Galentine that she's going to tackle this issue going forward. Thank you.
Paul, phenomenally keeping with the time. Next person, rodent control, Arden Reamer, please.
Well, I think we need to do more, and we absolutely do need to vote in favor and pass the operating override, because in the operating override is funding for three different inspectors, one for trash removal for DPW and 2 inspectors to inspect restaurants and commercial businesses to make sure that they are throwing away and complying with our regulations around trash disposal. That is a key problem with the rats. And in order to do that, we've got to pass the override so that we can do that portion of it. We already have modern pest, and we have new forms of electrocuting the rats, and we can see those around town. But I also want to give a shout out to my constituent, Fran Perler, who was the one who started the petition for more funding for our town to help abate the rat situation. And she was adamant about it. And I want to give a shout out to her, because it all started right here in Precinct 8, where we have a tremendous rat problem. It is a real issue. And so I'm hoping that with the operating override comes the opportunity to fund our rat abatement program and hire some inspectors and make sure that we deal with the trash situation and effectively and efficiently. Thank you.
Thank you. 1 minute lightning round, rodent control, John Van Scoyer, please.
Arden, thank you for that shout out to Fran Perler. I think I want to mention that one of the things Fran is concerned about, and I think this is a good concern, is okay, so we have this program. It involves these high-tech devices that supposedly trap and kill rats, and as far as I know, they do. But can we please have regular reports on, where are they? How many rats are they actually killing? Is that enough? And furthermore, and this is the hard question, how come I never see one in my neighborhood? And Fran keeps asking that question. I've been at a meeting with Fran where she has asked that question. And it's a good question. And so I think we got to evaluate that program as it goes along in terms of its effectiveness, where the devices are being placed, but also in terms of questions of the places where the devices are not being placed. And the other thing I'll say about the rat problem, as I mentioned earlier about solar panels, it's complicated. So I don't think we should rush to judgment. We got to test this program we have, then we got to test some other programs, and then we got to go with the program that is the most effective.
Thank you. Let's see. I think all 3 of you rodent control, right? You're
Yeah,
covered on that?
yes.
Good. Okay. So the next question and final question, again, try to keep a 1 minute lightning round if you can. Paul Warren, the question of composting. We all know the advantage. This is on the ballot for the May town election. As part of the budget override item 2B, I believe. We all know the advantages of composting, overthrowing our organic matter in the trash. The issue is in a organized program like that, the companies truck the compost to other towns far away. Is this a good arrangement? First, are you in favor of townwide composting? Secondly, would you stay with that aspect of it, or would you try to have local depositories, shall we say, in Brookline? And again, the first respondent, Paul Warren, please.
Thank you.
1
So
minute lightning round. 1 minute lightning round.
1 minute,
please.
although I don't think anybody's stuck to the 1 minute, but I'll do the best I can.
Yeah,
So,
I know.
So one, I support composting. Amy and I have been Black Earth customers since they first started. And every week I take that bucket out. So I think it's important that we continue to compost and not put that into our trash stream. The question is is it better to use a third party like Black Earth, or should we have our own truck that goes around and picks it up and takes it somewhere and makes a pile? I don't think, frankly, we should be in the business of storing compost and turning it and then distributing it. I think that there's other parties that do this well. Why should we take on the expense of that? I think the third parties can do it well. I do want to say that, if it's required, I have heard from seniors that say, I have a bucket in my backyard and I would rather put it there. I compost on my own. I have the space in my yard, and to suddenly force me to have to take on the expense, each month for something that I can do on my own, I need the ability to opt out because I'm on a fixed income and I don't want to have to, add to my costs. So whatever we do, I think we need to be flexible and consider the increasing costs for seniors and other low-income individuals that are their household budgets are under pressure. Thank you, John.
Okay, let's see, composting, Arden Reamer, please.
To be or not to be? That's the question, right? That's the ballot question when it comes to composting, to be. And I vote yes on composting. It's exactly right that we need to think about the costs. Absolutely. Are we in the business of doing composting? But a big part of us getting to our zero emissions goal, and I'm going to repeat it again, our zero emissions goal by 2040 is how we deal with our trash. And composting is a tremendous part of it. We need to have zero waste emissions. Composting is important. We need to make sure that we move towards no incineration. If we are going to get to a 50% reduction by 2030 and our net zero goal by 2040, how we throw away our garbage is important. So absolutely, we may not be in the business of it, but if we are using a Black Earth or some other service to do our composting, we need to make sure that they are complying with our goals of net zero by 2040, right? So composting is important. We don't want to burden any of our residents with a cost that is too high for them, but we absolutely need to think about our waste as part of our goal to reach net zero emissions by 2040. Thank you.
Thank you. John Van Scoyoc, 1 minute lightning round composting.
Composting is good. I have been a backyard composter myself. But then again, we transitioned to using Black Earth composting, the pickup service. Again, excellent. I will confess that I am making up my mind on that to be. And here's the reason. I was all for it and spoke to advocates for it in the week leading up to the publication of the pamphlet that we're going to circulate to every voter in Brookline. And then I began to have discussions with some of the most ardent composting advocates, one of whom wrote the Vote No essay in this pamphlet. And the reason being that a strong feeling has developed that this was too big an ask that is going to essentially result in there being about $1 million of money not used out of this appropriation for the composting program, and that'll give composting a bad name if money has to be returned after being voted by voters. So I got to do some more research on the arguments for and against 2B.
Thank you. And so we are now at closing remarks, and I will ask everybody to stay with the 2 minutes. And Arden Reamer, if you would go first, and this is to make up for the fact that I was getting mixed up in terms of who was answering what when on previous questions. So closing remarks, Arden Reamer, please.
Thank you so much, John. In closing, I want to thank Climate Action Brookline and John Harris once again, as well as my 2 other esteemed colleagues and candidates for the Select Board, John and Paul. And my mom for being here and always being there to support me. Thank you, Mom. If I am elected to the Select Board, I will not only be pursuing progressive environmental policy, but continue on the front lines of implementing it as your leader on the Executive Board. Here's what I hope to accomplish when it comes to combating the climate crisis on the Select Board. Be the dedicated Select Board representative on the Zero Emissions Advisory Board. Work with ZIAB to introduce articles at each and every town meeting that move us in the direction of Brookline's goal of net zero by 2040 with a 50% reduction in emissions by 2030. Implement and publicize the PACE program to commercial, residential, and nonprofit building owners towards retrofitting our buildings to fossil fuel-free infrastructure. Support budgeting for a dedicated consultant for the building department who can advise them on fossil fuel-free building standards, and implementation of the new 10 communities pilot program, otherwise known as Warrant Article 15, when, notice how I didn't say if, when it passes at Springtown meeting. Advocate for environmental justice and promote awareness of the devastating impact on a segment of our population in Brookline. Vigilance, talking, advocating, and promoting climate forward policies in every facet of leading this town. Hopefully my answers tonight, along with my voting record at town meeting, have convinced you that I am exactly the climate warrior and municipal leader you want fighting to save our planet and all of us from the imminent threat we are currently facing, and to reach Brookline's goal of net zero by 2040 with a 50% reduction in emissions by 2030. Please vote Arden Reamer, your climate warrior, for the select board on May 2nd. Thank you.
Thank you. John Van Scoyac, closing remarks, please. 2 minutes firm.
Arden just got a big thumbs up from her mom. Hi, Sue. All right, I want to say this about the sponsors of this forum. And John, I know you don't want any more buttering up, so I won't butter. I'll just mention that Brookline has a strong tradition of climate activism. Climate Action Committee is one. Climate Action Brookline, excuse me, is one of them. The Climate Advisory Committee, which was the predecessor to ZAB, again, another. Brookline Green Space, I could, and now we've got Mothers Out Front, and we've got the Solid Waste Advisory Committee. There are so many people that have laid the groundwork for Brookline to be at the forefront of climate initiatives. And it has been my honor, and I mean that, to be their advocate in transitioning from the Select Board's Climate Advisory Board to the ZAB, much more strongly positioned, with very, very strong leadership from within the climate activist community, and a plan to, through initiatives, through ZAB, in coordination with the town's sustainability director, taken to town meeting. Then I become the advocate for those measures at town meeting, and I fought for them. Just like I fought alongside the climate activists when they said to the US Open, have your golf tournament in Brookline, but how about being a climate leader with your golf tournament? Just like I was proud to be their advocate when we had to convince the sponsors of school projects include geothermal. So I've gone down that road, and I want to go down that road even further, and achieve even more in a second term. But I hope people will recognize that climate leadership exists on the select board right now. And I hope that you want it to continue and to go even further, because that's what I want to do. And I'm glad to have worked with a lot of good people to get it this far.
Thank you. Closing remarks, Paul Warren, 2 minutes firm, please.
Yes, and John, thank you for hosting this forum, and also to Big for broadcasting and recording it, and we can rewatch it over and over. Thank you so much, and to all the attendees for their great questions. It's been a really exciting forum. There are many competing priorities for Brookline: education, environmental, our seniors aging in place, our roadways, paying off debt. And at the executive level, at the select board level, we need leadership to be able to balance these. If the climate crisis is a worldwide problem, it is incredibly important that we do our fair share. In the process of doing our fair share, we cannot make Brookline uninhabitable by people that aren't extremely wealthy, right? We can't make it unaffordable. We really need to make sure that we integrate and think about the future, all aspects of climate action. When we plan for our future, we plan our budget, we plan our roadways, but we have to make sure that we allow Brookline to continue to be affordable, and that we allow Brookline to be accessible by those that don't have as much money as many in Brookline. So I will bring a balanced perspective to it. I have children and grandchildren that are inheriting a big giant mess, and I want us to do our part. But I really do value those individuals that are here today that are struggling to stay within Brookline because it's becoming very expensive. And I value those that can't come to Brookline today because it's too expensive. So these are our competing priorities, and I'm committed to make sure that we do all that we can within our financial ability and with the support of the community to address the climate change and climate crisis. Thank you.
Thank you, candidates. Now to wrap up, the town election in question is on Tuesday, May 2nd, with early voting before then. We hope this evening has helped clarify how you will vote on Tuesday, May 2nd. Our next Climate Action Brookline meeting will be Monday, May 8th at 5 p.m. The agenda is not yet finalized, but it will focus on the environmental warrant articles that are part of the Maytown meeting and possibly be a discussion of wider context of those articles. Stay tuned. Somebody mute, please. I'd like to thank everybody. I'd like to thank the candidates, thank the people at Brookline Interactive Group, and I would like to thank everyone attending and everyone who submitted questions. Thank you all, and everybody have a good night. With that, I would like to officially adjourn the meeting, and please, big people, please stop the recording, and we will see you all very soon. Thank you very much.
Bye.